Um, I'm one of the pastors here at New Life. I'm excited to be with you guys. I do have my water. Chris Hall, he made a really good suggestion on Friday, and so I have my water. I heeded his advice. My wife and I, we love to travel, and we just came back from London and Paris. Has anybody been to London or Paris? Yeah? Good? Bad? Woo! Yeah! No? Okay. Well, anyways, we decided to go to London. We had a former New Lifer. He was getting married on the coast, and so we decided we're going to make a little bit of like a trip. We're going to see him. We're going to go and kind of see Europe. And we booked this trip like 5 months ago. And at the time, we thought it was a really good idea to have our 9-month son. Well, at that time, he was 4 or 5 months. We were like, man, this is going to be great. He'll be fine. At that time, he was sleeping through the night. He was an angel. And so we were like, yeah, we're going to just take him to Europe, and it's going to be no problem. We went and we booked in London. We booked this Airbnb. Have you guys ever done an Airbnb? Do you even know what an Airbnb is? Yep. Okay, most of you guys know. Well, if you don't know, what it is basically you book a person basically opens up their home, and you go and kind of book it, and then you kind of have their place as your own. So it's like kind of like you have your own apartment, your own pad. So Felicia and I were like, we were really pumped because we booked this Airbnb in London. It's going to be awesome. It looks really cool. So anyways, what we find out is that the person who is renting it to us is very particular. Now, I'm particular, but even more particular than me. That's a lot. I know, exactly. You're right. So we come in, and we immediately realize that they do not like, well, first off, usually you have the whole place to yourself. So we, not only was the host there, but the host and 2 other people were there. And they were like, oh, we forgot that you have a baby. And if you don't like live with a baby, having a baby like cry and scream at 12 o'clock and like 1 o'clock in the morning, for those of you who are parents, is just like the most mortifying thing when you have other people in like the house. So anyways, the first night, Zayden is like, he's sleeping great, but then he has his jet lag and he wakes up like 1 o'clock in the morning and he's screaming, and we're like, oh my gosh, like what the heck, like this is terrible, we don't want to wake everybody up. The guy comes running out in his underwear and he's like, you should probably take him outside. So we're like walking him outside in the middle of the cold, in the middle of the night, and we're like, this is just very uncomfortable. Then the second day happens. So we're running through London, we got our stroller, like we're seeing all the sights. But here's the thing, when I see a city, I see, Ed can attest, I walk it like crazy. And I just want to walk and I want to see everything, and London's pretty big. So I basically walked my wife to death. She was like weary. It was 6 o'clock in the evening, and we're deciding, what do we do? Do we go back to our Airbnb, and they have a kitchen, we could like get some spaghetti and we could like make food, but both of us were like, man, they do not seem like the people who would want us to use their pots and pans. So we'll just stay here. So we decided, like, all right, well, maybe we'll just go to a very inexpensive restaurant, maybe like a pizza place, a place where Zayden can kind of roam. So we decided, we're very brilliant, we decided to go into the busiest and the most expensive place in all of London. So we go straight into this place, and then it starts to downpour. So our son is not, he's getting hungry, he's like dirty because he's just dirty, and then like he is getting drenched, we're getting drenched, and we're like trying to find a pizza place in London. There's only fish and chips places in London, that's true. So we're just like, where do we go? So we're just weaving in and out of the streets. We find this bar, and we're like, hey, there's open seats right there, and they tell us, well, it's like a 15-minute wait. So I'm like, oh no. She's like, go and find a place. So I go sprinting into the London streets, and I'm dodging in and out of people, weaving in and out, and then I find Chinatown. Yes, there is a Chinatown in London. I had no idea. So I find Chinatown, and there's a pizza place in Chinatown. I'm like, this is amazing. This is perfect. So Felicia, we go to the pizza place, but the pizza place, they tell us there's no room at the inn for 15 minutes. And we're like, we're back in the same predicament that we were just in. So we're outside, we're getting drenched, And then the people in the pizza place are literally looking at us, judging us for putting our baby like out in the rain and out in the cold. Felicia walks across the street, and there's this opening. She goes down the stairs, then she pops her head out. She's like, come on down. So I go and I carry the stroller down the stairs, and we come into a room that's literally the size of that ballroom. Not like a ballroom, but that ballroom right back there. It is like this tiny little space. There's 4 tables. And we have this huge stroller which takes up almost half of the room, and I'm just like, this is not a good idea. This is kind of this nasty hole-in-the-wall place. Our son has a huge blowout, so we go to the bathroom, but there's not really a bathroom. There's just a sink and 2 doors, so we have to change him on the floor. And then there's like 3 people in the entire little establishment, and one of them is standing behind us waiting for the bathroom at the exact time that I am trying to like clean up my son. Then we come back in, and these high schoolers had come in and taken our seats and pushed us over. So now we're in the middle of the restaurant, our stroller's here, our son's dirty, he's hungry, we're hungry, and we're like, what is going on? So I order my food, this lasagna, but I get lasagna, fries, and salad. Very interesting combination. So I'm eating my lasagna, and the high schoolers next to me smell like an armpit. So I have the smell of the armpit, I'm eating my lasagna, my son's all dirty, and in that moment, I just start to laugh. In moments like that, you just have to laugh, because the point is that what we were doing was completely unconventional. Taking an infant to Europe, for all of you guys who will have kids at some point, that's a bad idea. I'm just throwing a free piece of advice. It's a bad idea. It's unconventional. But here's the thing, all of us want to be unconventional. There's something in all of us that we want to go up the stream. We want to go against the current. We want to be outside the box. We might not live that way, but there's something in all of us that wants to be free, that wants to be unconventional, that wants to do something that just doesn't make sense. We've been going through this series called Unconventional. We've been looking at the life of Christ, and we've been seeing how Christ lives this unconventional, crazy life, and then he calls us to follow him and calls us to live an unconventional life. So the question for all of us is, what does it look like to live an unconventional life? So if you guys want to flip with me to Luke 17, we're going to be looking at a passage in Luke 17, and we're also going to be looking at a passage in Mark 1, but we'll be in Luke 17 first. So the first point in your bulletin, you can mark it right now, is that we must admit that we are sick. That's the first point. We must admit that we are sick. In Luke 17, verses 11 through 13. Now on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. So here we are. Let's kind of set the stage here. Jesus is making his final journey to Jerusalem. This is where he's going to get killed. And he goes on the border between Galilee and Samaria. If you don't know, like the Jews and the Samaritans were not friends, they were arch enemies. So he's going into this very racially tense area, probably very specifically. Comes to this village, and outside of this village are these lepers. Now, in the Bible, the word leprosy is not, it can kind of include Hansen's disease. If you know what Hansen's disease is, it's the actual word for leprosy. But it includes not only Hansen's disease, but it includes all other types of skin diseases. And in fact, in Leviticus 13, this is kind of the result. This is what the Bible, kind of the result of having these skin diseases. It could be any type of skin disease. The result is the person with such an infectious disease must wear torn clothes, let his hair be unkempt, cover the lower part of his face, and cry out, unclean, unclean. As long as he has the infection, he remains unclean. He must live alone. He must live outside the camp. So here's the thing. Whether it's this specific like Hansen's disease or whether it is like just a overall skin disease, the result is that you were unclean. The result is that you were outside of the camp. The result is that you were kind of disconnected from your people. You were disconnected from your family, from your friends. You're kind of ostracized. You're kind of condemned. Like you actually have to, can you imagine that? You have, like whenever you come into like people, you have to cover your face and you have to yell out, unclean, unclean. There's these unwritten rules where you could not stand within 6 feet of another person. And then on a day when it's really windy, you couldn't stand within 150 feet of a person. Think about that. Like completely void of social interaction unless you found other people who were lepers. There's leprosy in itself, it is a debilitating disease. It creates these sores. You have all these sores on you all over. It removes feelings in your hands and in your feet and in your arms and your legs, numbing you to the point where you could put your hand on like a hot plate and you'd have no idea. It would basically, it just numbs you from life. It just numbs you from everything. And here it is. This is a description of leprosy. And a guy wrote in a book, he said, their open sores were held together by blood-stained bandages. Many of their appendages had been sanded down into irritated nubs, and their noses had been ground down to the point that they were almost totally flat. 2 holes in their faces through which they could barely draw each difficult breath. So if you had these skin diseases, you not only had the social ramifications of being disconnected, but you had the physical ramifications of this disease literally destroying your body. Now the question, and in the question, just a statement, is that I think sin is like this. Usually when you look in the Bible, like when the Bible is talking about disease, it's trying to show something about sin. It's trying to show something about the effects of sin. I think sin very much is like leprosy. It's very much like a skin disease. Let's think about it for a second. It starts slowly. It's kind of inconspicuous at first. You kind of think like, this isn't really that big of a deal, but it starts slowly spreading. You're trying to contain it. And then all of a sudden, it starts to take over. It starts to disable you. It starts to destroy you. It starts to make you so numb that you can't even touch or experience the things around you. And eventually, it kills you. But then not only that, like the aim of sin and the aim of disease is not only to take over that person and completely destroy it, but its aim is to reproduce. Its aim is to spread. So that is also the effect of sin, is that it not only destroys, but its aim is to infect other people. And this is exactly what happens with leprosy. Is that leprosy is it's just contagious. And at that time in the first century, it was there wasn't a cure. It was incurable. So when a person came into a village yelling out, unclean, unclean, what that meant is everyone in the street, what you'd immediately do is you would flee, you would run. You'd be like, if I had my kids, I'd be running, I'd be out of there, because it's so contagious. It's so incurable. There's such a fear around it. And this is what sin does to us. Like it disconnects us from people. It isolates us from people. It isolates us from God. It disconnects us from God. God sees us as unclean. God sees us on the outside. God sees us as untouchable because of the sin in us. But here is the reality. None of us, no one wants to admit that they're sick. Nobody wants to admit that they're sick. I've been sick this week. I don't want to admit that I'm sick. No one wants to admit that they're sick. I was watching this clip from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Has anybody seen it? It's such a good movie. But it's where it's like I I don't even know the context, but the night's coming up, it's the Black Knight, and the guy's like, you shall not pass. And they have this epic sword battle, and then he cuts his arm off, and he's just like, he's got one arm, and he's like, it's just a flesh wound. It's like, come and fight like a man. And so he goes and like cuts his other arm off, and he's like, I'm invincible, and he starts kicking him, and then he cuts his legs off. The guy goes running, he's like, come back here, you coward. It's like, I feel like that is exactly how we react to sin. And that's exactly how we react to sickness, is that we are just like, it's just a flesh wound, it's just nothing, it's not a big deal. You have to imagine the leper. Imagine the leper in this case. You will have this position, you have this status within society, and then all of a sudden, you see a sore on you. What do? The first thing you do is you kind of push it aside. You're like, this isn't anything. It'll go away. It's not a big deal. And then all of a sudden, it starts to spread. And you're like, oh no. Like, you're like, oh, I got to kind of cover this up. I got to wear something bulkier so that it'll cover up my arms and my legs, because I can't let anybody see this. I got to put some cosmetics on. And then all of a sudden, it starts going up. It starts going up your neck, it starts going around your ears, your hairline, it's on your hands, it's just full blown, you can't contain it anymore. And you've been exposed, everyone can see it. And they're like, man, this guy's got leprosy. You can't hide that anymore, and you're ostracized, and you're disconnected, and you're outside the community. And you find yourself crying out for pity. That's where we find these lepers. They are crying out for pity. They can't bring anything to society. They are begging for food, for shelter, for clothing. They're begging for compassion. There's no pride left. They've realized that they are the untouchable. They've lost all dignity. They're almost non-human. And this is what sin does to us. I know I'm painting a very bleak picture, but this is the reality. This is what sin does to us. It slowly creeps in, it takes over everything, and it robs us of our dignity. This is in all of us. We're all infected. We're all affected by it. We, unfortunately, are the untouchables. And I don't have to tell you that. I don't have to tell you that there's some messiness in you. I don't have to tell you that you're sick. You know that already. You know what you've done. You know what you've thought. You know what you've felt in your heart. I don't need to tell that. I don't need to tell you that. You know that you can't even hold your own standard, nonetheless God's standard. I am guilty just like you guys are. We're all in the same boat, and the first thing that what we have to do is we just have to admit it. Admit it to ourselves, admit it to God, and maybe admit it to some other people. But the beautiful part of the story is that it doesn't just end there. It doesn't just end with some lepers and that's it. The second point is that we must receive the cure. The second point is that we must receive the cure. In Matthew 9, this is what Jesus says. Jesus says, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but the sinners." And how incredible is that? That Jesus is like, I am not here for the clean, but the unclean. I'm not here for those who are healed, but those who are sick. I'm not here for those who are righteous, but for the sinners. I'm not here for those who I can interact with, but for the untouchables. That is why I have come here. That is unbelievable. What we see in verse 14 in the Luke 17 passage. When Jesus saw them, he said, "Go, show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were cleansed. What's incredible is that he gets involved. It says that he saw them. They're crying out from a distance. And you don't hear, what it doesn't say is Jesus hollers at them. It's not like, hey, he doesn't bypass them. He doesn't say, I don't have enough time. He actually goes and he sees them. It means that he comes in closer. Who does that? To people that you shouldn't come close to. He comes in closer. He gets involved. He gets invested. There's this other passage in the Gospels, in Mark 1, if you want to flip to Mark 1 real quick. I think it's going to be on the board too. Is this other instance that Jesus has with a leper. And this is just incredible. In verse 40, a man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Filled with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." Immediately the leprosy left him and he was cured. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. "See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them." So here this guy, this leper comes up and he's coming to Jesus. He comes to Jesus and he's doing the same thing that these 10 other lepers are. He's just crying out for mercy. And then look at what Jesus says, what happens in verse 41, filled with compassion. Jesus is filled with compassion and he reached his hand and touched the man. Think about that. This is a leper who is extremely contagious, who has something that's incurable, that people do not even come in contact with. You don't even want to be 150 feet away from them on a windy day. And here Jesus touches them. He touches him. This is unbelievable. It's unbelievable to see that Jesus reaches out to him. And this is exactly what he does on the cross. That Jesus gets involved. That this is your next point. He got involved and he took off his gloves and he got his hands dirty. He got involved. He took off his proverbial gloves and got his hands dirty. But this is exactly what he did on the cross. That he takes our sin, he takes our sickness, he takes our leprosy and puts it on himself. It's as if he's touching us and basically like sucking it up, and he's putting it all onto himself. And he's saying, now you're cured. Like the prescription for all of our sickness is the cross. This is just so awesome. This is entirely what Jesus is about. It is about rescuing the untouchables, about redeeming those who were once ostracized and once humiliated and once disconnected, going after those people who are on the outside, restoring the dignity of the outcast. Can you imagine what these lepers are experiencing? Can you imagine having leprosy for, we don't know how long this guy has leprosy, but can you imagine having leprosy for years? Where you can't have true social interaction with people. And you can't have true physical interaction with people. And then in this moment, this guy comes into your life and he touches you. This could be the first interaction that they have for years. They don't have hope for interaction. They don't have hope that people are going to engage them. And then all of a sudden, here is this man who comes in and restores their dignity. And then he tells them, he says, go to the priest and make yourself clean, because now you can come back into the community. You can rejoin the community. You don't have to be on the outside anymore. Now you're one of mine. You're clean. Can you imagine what these lepers are thinking, what this leper in this passage is experiencing? The reality is that this is possible for all of us. Like, all of us have an opportunity to be healed. All of us have an opportunity to receive the cure. Like these lepers, they come to Christ, and then Jesus tells them to go to the priest, and they follow him, and as they follow him, that's when all of a sudden it's like, I'm clean, this is awesome. Like every single one of us has an opportunity. This could be your moment today. Will you accept the cure? The reality is that a lot of us would say that we've received this cure. A lot of us would say that we've received Christ. A lot of us would recognize that Jesus is unconventional. But if we're going to say that we follow Christ, that means that we're going to have to live an unconventional life. The question is this true of us? I was thinking of 3 reasons why we don't see this in our lives. I was thinking of 3 reasons why we don't see this unconventionality in our lives. And the first one, it's in your bulletin, it's the point A. It's we're too busy, or we're too self-focused. You have to think of the disciples. Here Jesus is telling them, like, he's on his way to Jerusalem, and then all of a sudden these lepers come out, and they're probably thinking, like, dude, you're going to Jerusalem, like, why? Like, we don't have time for this. Like, let's just keep going. But Jesus doesn't do that. He stops. Like, I was in the Paris metro. It was like the subway. And Felicia and I, it was on our last day in Paris. And we were feeding Zayden. And this woman comes over. And she has like a hijab on. And she's carrying her daughter. And she asks for money. And in that moment, like, she looks at Felicia. And Felicia's like, babe, what can we do? Like, I don't know. She said, but she is kind of, babe. And so I'm like, and I'm kind of just trying to look at her like, this isn't the right time because like we're feeding our son. Like the next stop is when we're supposed to get off. And I'm like, we're trying to get from point A to point B. This woman really isn't a part of that solution. And so I'm like, I'm just trying to and also at the same time, we have a whole chunk of change in my pocket. So I don't want to like take all the change out. I know you guys have thought the same thing. So you don't want to take all the change out. But at the same time, like we only had so much change. We only had so much money on us to finish like the last day. So I'm just kind of like shaking my head like. And I'm just letting this woman, and here's the thing, in typical situations, you can just blow on by. But this woman you're on a train, and this woman just stood there. And I just started sweating, and I just looked down, basically just like ignoring her existence. And I'm not proud of that. But is this not true? Does this not happen to all of us at some point? We're just so focused on getting from point A to point B. This person is trying to intercept our lives, and it's kind of like, I don't really have time for you. I've got to go here. So I'll kind of like sidestep you, and I'll go this way. Is that not true of all of us? The second thing is that we have a reputation at stake. You have to think that the disciples are kind of just like, man, like, yeah, we've been hanging out with this riffraff. We've been hanging out with these outcasts, but like lepers, seriously, these guys are like the outcasts of the outcasts. Like these guys are like, if people see us hang out with these guys, they probably think that we have leprosy. Like, and that will make us social lepers. Like they're probably thinking that. Like I was thinking of 2 guys from junior high. And these guys, one guy, his name was Chris, the other guy was Josh. These guys were in my band class. I played alto sax, not very well, but I did. The guy Chris, he played baritone sax, and he had like some acne, he had like a mustache, he was in 7th grade, he had a mustache. Come on, he had a mustache, he didn't have the nicest of clothes, he kind of had some BO. And so I was just, I'm trying to I'm in 7th grade, I'm trying to engage, just talk to Chris. And Chris doesn't want to talk to me. So then I do what every 7th grader does. I try to poke him and try to I don't know, I'm mean. But I'm not he mean, but I'm trying, and he chops my arm off, doesn't want any direction at all. Then there's Josh, he plays the French horn. Kind of goofy looking, he's got big glasses, the bar across, that's what I had back in the day, back in 3rd grade, and these were guys who, they were never picked on, because they were never noticed by anybody. After junior high, I never saw them again. They weren't in high school, they weren't in my high school, I tried to look them up on Facebook, they were basically shadows, as if they didn't exist. And at that time, I'm not thinking about I really want to hang out with Chris and Josh, because at the time I wanted to be popular. I wanted people to like me. I wanted a girlfriend. And if I wanted to get the girlfriend, even back in junior high, hanging out with Chris and Josh are not going to get me there. I didn't even have a reputation, but I had I didn't want a I didn't want a certain type of reputation. this is the second reason why we skirt around, why we don't live an unconventional life. The third reason is that we need to self-protect. You have to think that literally the disciples are with Jesus are probably thinking like, man, we could literally contract leprosy. And I don't want to contract leprosy. Like, I work at a hospital, and there's this one patient who had bed bugs. Ben, you can attest how nasty bed bugs are. Many people can. Anyways, like, this patient had bed bugs, and he had this. Ben does not have bed bugs. He kills bed bugs. He is not a leper with bed bugs. He's a good guy. This guy had bed bugs. He had this heart pump, and there are bed bugs literally coming out of his heart pump. It's really disgusting. It is. So it's just like, we've kind of quarantined his room off because we don't want bed bugs to come out. So we kind of quarantined him in, and that was my patient. And I'm thinking the whole time, I'm like, what can I do to not go into this guy's room? Like, can I make it 12 hours without ever having to interact, without ever having to put myself at risk? Then my nurse manager is like, we gotta like disinfect this guy. Like, we have to disinfect this room, we have to bag everything up, and we have to get him out. So literally, we gown up head to toe. I've got the gown, I've got these huge boots on, I've got like the hair bonnet, I've got like the huge face mask, I've got double glove. Then I'm like taping up every area where there's possible like bed buggage that could like come in. And I'm just like, it's like E.T. It's just like I'm in completely contained. So we come in and it's like everything's just like, I don't want to personally interact with the guy. It's just everything's held at arm's length. And do we not do that with people? Is that we want to keep people at an arm's length. We're afraid, we don't want to contract it. I think this is in all of us. I think the reality is that we can't love people if we're going to keep people at an arm's length. Like, it's impossible. It's impossible to love people without getting messy. Like, loving people means getting involved in their dirty messes. And as human beings, let's be honest, we're all dirty messes. We're all messy people. And this is exactly what Jesus does. He gets involved in their dirty messes. The early Christians, they were known for their compassion. They were known for getting involved. When there was a plague that happened, they were the ones on the scene hugging the sick, risking receiving that plague. There's this quote by the Bishop of Alexandria. He says that the pagans threw their sick into the roads before they were dead, even their own family, and treated their unburied corpses like dirt. And here were the Christians who are the exact opposite, who are going and taking the people who are thrown into the streets and touching them and getting involved and getting their hands dirty. So this is where we come in. Like, we are all sent out to have compassion. We are all sent out to be healers. This is your third point. At the end of this passage in Mark, verse 45, Jesus is like, go to the priest, but instead he went out and he began to talk freely, spreading the news. You have to imagine that as soon as this leper receives healing, as soon as he's like, oh my gosh, I received this healing, you have to imagine that he's like, I've got to go and tell the other lepers. Like, wouldn't you do that? Wouldn't you be like, man, there's other guys that I know who have leprosy, and I know the cure, so now I have to go and tell these other guys. And that's immediately what he does. And then in Luke 17, this is what happens. In verse 15, one of them, so these all 10 are going to the priest. One of them, when he saw he was healed, he came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?
Then he said to him, rise and go. Your faith has made you well. So it's like, here he is. Like, there's 10 guys going. All 10, they all receive this healing. And then all of a sudden, the 9 just keep on going. They just keep on going like the rest, like nothing happened. I feel like this happened, this is me all the time. Like, it's just like, yeah, like Jesus kind of did something cool, and now I'm just going to go on and pursue like the rest of my life. Like, it really didn't matter. Like, why? Jesus is even asking us, he's like, why did the 9 not come back? And then you have this one guy who's like, he completely turns around. Receives the healing, he completely turns around, and then he starts to worship. Then he starts to praise God in a loud voice. He'd only been yelling out for pity all this time, and now he's praising God with a loud voice, comes at Jesus' feet and thanks him and worships him. Like, Jesus is not just about like this one-time physical healing. He is about the transformation of everything in us. Not just the outside, but the inside and out. And he gives us a new heart to have compassion on other people. I have a friend who, he was just kind of a selfish guy, would not have been the guy that you would see who would go and help a leper. And God just did something in his life, something in his heart. And he started working downtown, and he walked past this guy every day, and this guy didn't have any arms. And one day he walked past the guy, and there were 2 coworkers in front of him, and one of them was talking about the guy without any arms, and she's like, I saw this guy today walking across High Street right in front of the State House, and his pants fell to the ground, and he was just exposing himself. And she was like, it was gross. It was disgusting. Like, it ruined my day. Brandon's thinking, that's my friend. Brandon's thinking about this. I'll give him a shout out. Brandon's thinking about this, if you know my friend Brandon. And he's just like, the guy has no arms. Like, the guy can't pull up his pants. Someone has to help him pull up his pants. And he had just this compassion on him. So he went upstairs, and he had to run an errand later, and he's like, I have to know this guy. I just had to ask his name. So he psychs himself up, he does the errand, he comes back, and he's like, I'm going to go and ask this guy, and he walks right by him. And he goes upstairs, and then he starts beating himself up. He's like, I'm a chicken. He's just like, I'm such a loser. How can I just like walk by this guy? What the heck? Then he starts psyching himself up again. And he walks back, and he's like, all right, we're going. So he just goes running downstairs, and he's like, all I'm going to do is I'm going to just ask this guy if I can fix his hat. So he's approaching the guy, and as he's approaching the guy looks up and asks him and says, can you fix my hat? So Brandon goes, of course he fixes his hat, and then the guy's like, can you help me up? And the guy explains that there was a guy who was helping him up every day, but he had just moved. Coincidence? I think not. Every day. So every day Brandon would help him up, and then he would give him some food, or he'd give him a sip of water, or he would do anything that this guy needed. And that's just the thing, like when we are changed, when our hearts are transformed, when we receive the healing, when we receive the cure, it just gives us a compassion. Like we become people of passion, just like Jesus had compassion on us. I wish I could go back to junior high right now, or somehow find Chris and Josh and just somehow get involved in their lives, somehow get my hands dirty, somehow I wish I could go into their homes. I wish I could just be in their lives and just know who they are and know that they are loved and know that they are valuable and know that they are not on the outside but that they are on the inside, that they're not the untouchable but that they belong. I wish I could do that. And here's the thing, all of us have opportunities to do that on our campus, to love the people on the outside. Because we were people on the outside. We were the outcasts. We were the untouchables. And we get an opportunity to do that everywhere. So the final question is, who are the outcasts among you? that need the compassion of Christ. The truth is, you might be one of the people who, you might feel like you're a leper. You might feel like you are the person on the outside, that you are the untouchable, you're the outcast. But let me tell you that you not only have a place here, that you are not the outcast, but that you have a place here and you have a place with Christ. And that today you have a place with Christ. And maybe you're just a person where you just feel like, I've been following Christ, but I know that there is numbness. I know that there is sin that has just made me numb. Well, today is the opportunity to just start admitting that and laying that at Jesus' feet and being like, I just want the cross. I want the cure. To break my heart. I want to have compassion. So I'm just going to finish and pray for us and ask the band to come up. So Heavenly Father, God, I just pray that, God, that we would recognize that you are the cure. God, that you would come into every part of us, every cell. That we would be a people who would be known like the first, second century Christians, that we would be known as people of compassion, that people who get their hands dirty. And I know that that doesn't mean that we just go like running at Ebola and not put on like a suit or anything. I'm not saying that, but God, that we would just not keep people at a distance, but we would get our hands dirty because you got your hands dirty with us. God, I pray that you would change us. You'd mold us into people like this, that you'd help us to see the people who are trying to intersect our lives.